The second panel, we're going to touch on the state of creativity, culture, and brands. Black creativity has always set the standard, but how often is it credited or protected? So I'm excited to welcome our new guest to touch on this conversation and dig into our influence on brands, culture, and creativity. Moderating today's panel is Tim Wasicki, the creative director for the Eastern region for OUTFRONT Media. And our panelists joining us today are Oury Tamboura. She's a VP of Global Brands and Advertising at Citibank. Alex Frais is the SVP at Steve Madden. Malcolm Ellis is the head of diverse investments at Diageo. And finally, Kerel Cooper, digital media executive at Gum Gum. Let's give them a warm welcome.
Thanks for the kind introduction. I'm particularly excited about this panel. As mentioned, I'm the creative director here at OUTFRONT for the East region. We work in advertising day in and day out, deal with numerous amount of clients. I'm sure we've worked with plenty of you all here. But I think what's important, we're gonna learn a lot today, but what's really important is how we show up, how we're showing up with purpose. And this is something that I try to bestow amongst my team day in and day out, right? And especially when it comes to, Black creativity, and, the culture as a whole, the influence, the branding, and how Black creativity influences every aspect of that. I think with all of that, all that impact, it comes a critical question. I think that kind of comes to mind is, are we witnessing celebration or commodification? Which kind of brings me to Oury. So Citibank, they tend to be you guys position yourselves as a purposely driven company, right? So I think the question for you first is, what are some of the risks brands have only engaging in Black culture during events like Black History Month or Juneteenth or any real topical moments or trendy moments, I'll say, kind of within the Black community?
Yeah, the risk that brand, first of all, thank you for having me. The risk that brands are taking by just associating themselves with those specific events is tokenism, in my opinion. The Black community is not only available, and I would say during those events, we don't only exist during Black History Month. It's not 4 months out of the year, it's 24/7. And we have to stay engaged with them throughout the year, in my opinion.
Right. I agree.
I would echo that. I think when brands, just throughout my career, I feel like the brands that I look up to and the way that I've been looking at, that I look at that is like, how do we just do this? This shouldn't be like one time a year. It's like, it's that holiday. It's like Valentine's Day. Oh, I love you, hon. No, it's like, it's like every day in theory, I should love you, right? So it's like a similar approach is kind of how I think about it. And the brands that do that well, that it's just part of the day-to-day programming, those are the ones that I look up to be like, wow, for inspiration, for guiding in terms of what I do and work on. It's just like, hey, how do we incorporate this as part of every day? What does that look like? And then the other piece that I always look at, like, how do we be additive as a brand to the conversation, right? So it's like one thing to be like, oh, we should be talking about this, yes. But how do we actually add value to that? It's almost like a social feed, right? I feel like sometimes everybody wants to be like, oh my God, this topic is trending, let's just create content for it. But I'm like, awesome, let's do that. But then how do we actually add value to it so that we're part of the conversation and like an active participant? So
yeah, if I can jump in there too, I just think it comes down to it's bad for the health and the future of your business, right? Because at the end of the day, Black spending power continues to grow, Black influence continues to grow, and if you are not building sustainable relationships with any consumer base that their spending power continues to grow, it's bad for business.
Agreed.
When you show up for a moment and then you're gone.
Right. I want to direct my next question specifically to Malcolm. You sit at the intersection of capital and culture, at what you do. And I think there's a fine line between celebrating Black culture and consuming it. Where do you see brands getting it right and where they fall short?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's very few brands get it right. So let's just start there. Even the ones in our house, right? The company I work for. To give you an example, Don Julio is having a great moment right now, and they did an integration with Popeye's chicken because that was sort of a nod to Black culture. I certainly wasn't in that room, so that's an example of, I think, us not getting it right. The ones that do get it right have people that look like me in the room making those decisions or pushing back on assumed things that will be culturally relevant. So I think it's a journey, right? What I love about this time that we're in right now is that we have a bit more agency in saying, to your point, how brands should show up, because I think there's a general understanding of what the spending power behind those consumers are. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, can I jump in and add to that?
Please.
Any Bob Marley fans in here? Right?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Right, so Exodus, I feel, is one of the most influential and best albums of all time, right? What I hate when I see is a travel commercial that plays One Love like it's a jingle, right? And waters down his music, right? And to me, that's an example of, taking from the culture and watering it down, right? And really watering down the message behind his particular music. That's just an example that comes to top.
Yeah, that's an excellent example. But I think that's tokenism, right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
hey, let's go grab something that we think that's culturally relevant and stick it in there and hope it works.
Right.
I also want to add that brands that are getting it right are not only inviting creators at the table and giving them a seat, but are actually allowing them to rearrange the room. They're giving them creative power, they're giving them a voice, and they're giving them access to have a voice for the strategy.
Yep.
How do we avoid it being diluted, generally?
So we're in a really, really interesting period in our history, right? You think about what happened in 2020 and the sort of accelerated progress that happened in the first 3 years after that. And then this sort of huge pullback. I never envisioned sitting in a country where companies will be hiding from their positions because of the climate that we're in. We are where we are. That said, I do think it's reflective of a period of our history where we sort of sought our own agency and our own voice and made significant progress. So it's an opportunity for us to look within as a community and push for that agency. And then, hold brands accountable. I don't want to use a Target example because I don't want to call out specific companies, but I think it's a period where we understand our power and we should use our power.
Great, very important. Kind of leads me to my next question. Do you think brands are leading or following culture, Black culture?
Yeah, I think for the moment, I think we're all in agreement. Following.
What would you say is the difference between the two, leading and following?
I think it goes back to, so what's top of mind for me is I'll go back to my travel example with Bob Marley, right? And I think you mentioned sort of tokenism, right, in there, right? To me, the leading that way would be, okay, how do you, if you're going to utilize his music, right, in a particular ad, how do you then follow that up with something of substance, right? Whether that is, development programs for professionals, right? Something that relates to the message in his music, right? To me, that flips it in terms of, following versus being a leader. And then also sticking with that through tough times when you get criticized, right? Or when maybe you will lose a particular customer base because now they don't agree with, what you're saying. To me, that's leading. Leading is being there, showing up for and being in the tough times.
Agreed.
I think one interesting way that I've been looking at it, that we've been talking about, it's like almost like top down versus bottom up, right? So top down, hey, this is happening, we have to be in this conversation, right, in the boardrooms, versus like bottoms up, it's like what I was saying, like what are the kids doing? What's actually happening? And that's like the brands that are in tune with that and having the right people in the room that actually know that tend to be more forward leading rather than following, because by the time it comes top down, we're probably late to the party. I'm not saying we don't need some of that more strategic, obviously, because that unlocks certain things from a budget standpoint and all that. But it's like, how do you marry the two? Because then that's where it could get really powerful. It's like, okay, top down, hey, we have that buy-in across the company and leadership, and then bottoms up, oh, they're actually helping to inform, that's actually helping us build that strategy and what's happening. Then we could actually actually have some real impact.
Right, because it goes back to Malcolm's earlier point, it's topical.
Exactly.
Right, it's not embedded in the company.
And it raises an interesting dynamic. Do we want brands to lead or do we want brands to follow? And I think 20 years ago, when the omni channels were very limited and Madison had kind of controlled eyeballs, brands kind of had that sort of creative control. But now everyone has a phone, and there's sub-communities and there are micro-communities. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad dynamic, to have people to create their own cultural elements, and then sort of brands to meet them where they are. Right? So you have to make a decision about what you want in terms of how you want to engage in this new communities that exist today.
Yeah, that's a great point, because you see now more and more consumers are choosing to spend dollars with brands who they see themselves in,
Correct.
or brands who align with their values and beliefs. And so I like that point. Yeah.
Yeah. The other interesting thing to that, I think, to your point around like creativity and like co-authoring, I think it's like how do we enable certain things that are happening, right? So how do we partner, enable from a creativity, and then use our collective kind of resources, but like from a brand perspective, I'm thinking about like, hey, we have a lot of surface areas, right? We have our social, we have our e-com, for us, we have stores. Oh, awesome, we can actually help enable that and kind of that next wave of creativity in partnership with some folks.
But it also comes back to your first question where, again, it's not engaging only during key moment. It's, staying in the pulse of the culture, staying constantly engaged, making sure that your research shows it, and have influencers, I guess, be part of your strategy.
Which is still important. We still need to recognize these specific moments in time because it's historical, it's important to our growth as a community. But yes, it shouldn't just be specifically those and only those. It leads me to my next question, which when we think about technology and targeting and data now being embedded into our everyday kind of work structure, and it's a part of everything we see online, and in regards to advertising as a whole, specifically when I think about my medium and advertising, how we're reaching consumers, how we're reaching certain communities, socially, et cetera. And what does that really mean, when we think about cultural narratives and visibility? But I think my question for the entire panel is, or specifically, I would love Kerel touch this, just you're more in the digital world. How do we keep Black culture from being diluted when we're selling products?
I think the way we do that is we have to recognize, honor, and put to the forefront the creators, right? And the people the creators of the media and the creators of the content in general, right? I think that is the way you keep the message or Black culture from, being diluted. And then again, it is about sort of the message and the advertising, but it's also about what are you doing holistically within the ad campaign, right? Going back to my example earlier, right? You can use the music, you can put up an advertising message, you can create a marketing campaign, but what are you then actually doing financially, professional development, the last panel talked a lot about, investing in Black-owned media. What are the things that you're continuing to do to support the culture and uplift?
Right. Ultimately, showing up in an authentic way.
Yeah, and that's, not a plug from my company here, but that's one of the reasons why I joined Gum Gum as CMO, because from a digital advertising perspective, we help brands reach consumers in contextually relevant places, right? So it's not about cookies or IDs or any of that particular information. It's about what are consumers actually consuming at the point in time where you want your brand to show up.
Right.
It's also about who is telling the story and how they're telling the story. You got to make sure that you use authentic voices and you plug within the community again.
Right. Just on culture, streetwear, and I'm kind of directing my question towards you specifically, Alex. I think a lot of what you see sonically, visually, in the advertising landscape, day in and day out, you see Black culture represented, and particularly with Steve Madden, I think the consumer base, it's very important to that, just showing up with authenticity. But what does authentic mean when it comes to telling Black stories, and who gets to decide what's authentic?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way at least we think about it, and I've thought about it historically, it's really like, hey, how do we, if I'm looking at like Black History Month, right, this has come up in the past, in past lives and current conversations, we're like, oh, we should tell a story, we should do something. I'm always like, how do we incorporate this as part of our business? Because then it's not we're gonna tell the story. It's actually, no, this is actually part of our business. It's day to day, right? We're partnering with somebody, we're telling a story, we're helping them. This is actually, it doesn't feel foreign in how we're talking to our consumers. So then it just becomes part of like the BAU, I call it BAU, business as usual. And we're doing we're checking all these boxes, so to speak, that it's like, oh, it's important to us, it's important to them. And then automatically this helps it come out authentically. Right? I think in terms of like who is helping to decide who's authentic, honestly, it's all of us. I mean, I think it's to your point, it's being in the room and having the right people in the room that could actually bring, I think, the right different perspectives. I think that conversation in the panel before us was super enlightening in terms of like, I've seen it, right? I think you were mentioning it a little bit where it's like, oh, there was a conversation, Don Julio did that, but you didn't have the right representation in the room. So again, everybody in the room was like, oh, that's great. Then you're like,
not so much.
Again, expected but great. Yeah. So like I think having those diverse views, because then I think for us is we have a really wide consumer base, right? I think it's a benefit and a curse, right? For us, I was just saying this to somebody yesterday. Our audience is 8 to 80, so that's pretty wide. And across the country, we're international, different price points, different categories. We have a men's business. Oh my God, right? So when we're casting, like, who do we feature, right? So I think it's for us, how do we have the diverse point of views in the room as we're having these conversations creatively, the storytelling, so that again, we can be representative of who's on the other side, who's seeing the message. So again, but it's definitely something that it's evolving, it's changing, and we're trying to change again, and hopefully everybody in this room is just changing and keeping up. Because again, this what I'm saying today, it's probably going to be outdated in a couple of years, and it's definitely different than I was looking at it before earlier in my career. So again, I think it's also moving so fast.
Right.
So again, I'll let anybody else chime in, but that's kind of how we've been thinking about it, and I've been thinking about it.
Great. I think the previous panel touched upon this as well. And figuratively speaking, the difference between having a seat at the table versus only being able to rearrange the furniture. What do we consider the differences? How do we show up? What's different amongst the two?
I mean, I think having a seat at the table, I think of, you're present, so there's presence there, right? I think having the ability to rearrange the seats, now that's influence and power. Mm-hmm. So that's how I look at the difference between.
Yeah, and I agree with that statement. I think a lot of brands for so long have been comfortable with just giving us a seat at the table, and I think we've come a long way. And it's about not only being in the room, it's being involved in the strategy, is rearranging the room, like you said. It means Black creators are not only, from a creative standpoint, just not being on the set, but being behind the camera, being involved with the strategy when you have a campaign, is having a cultural consultant in the room when you're planning that campaign. So that's how I see rearranging the room, but it's also giving them creative power, creative freedom, and having them benefit from with the financial reward from the work. That's also important, and I think one brand that's doing it really well, it's Netflix. They're not only having people in front of the camera, they're having people behind the camera. They're collaborating with studio like Tyler Perry. They just had a collaboration with Shonda Rhimes, just, you know, because they're doing all these things. They're giving them the creative freedom to do what they want, and they're sharing the financial reward of those collaborations.
I think one of the interesting things is I feel like, by the way, I agree completely with both of you. I think it's like, hey, there's the rooms that like we walk into where we're doing kind of, we're being representative, we have the influence and the power. And then it's, I think there's a lot of us also kind of grow in the industry and mature, and we become the leaders, and we are actually the ones creating the invite list for the rooms. I think that's the other interesting part where like we can actually we're helping to start to create and shape those rooms to make sure that we're capturing all that. Because that's how, again, I think we're in an interesting, a lot of us in this room, and definitely all of us up here, right? We're walking into certain rooms with leadership and we're doing all this, and then on the flip side, then we're going back to our respective teams, and we're the ones behind the table, so to speak, right? We're like, okay, let's talk, and how do you then bring that right cohort of people to make sure that we have that diversity? So I just want to call that out because I think that's we're in a really interesting place.
I think it's a critical point. And so 2 critical points. The power to rearrange the room and the power to create the list. Because I'm in some rooms today where I'm the only one, and it's a bit draining. Right? So it requires courage at times, right, to speak up. And it requires courage to always have to speak up. Right? So not just having a seat, but the arrangement of the seat, who controls the invite list, and then how many seats look like you in the room also matter. Because if you're the only one, that becomes draining.
I agree. For like young professionals that don't have representatives like yourselves in these positions, what are some things they can do to kind of help steer the narrative to, you know, so that they do have a say in these conversations?
You know, I was just having this discussion yesterday. I think it's important to network, not with just people that look like you, but people that don't look like you, and bring them on that journey of your cultural relevance. Let's start there. Because I think we tend to just put our heads down and do the work, and we don't do the sort of the soft skills required to build a network and to build, you know, a collaborative kind of work environment. I'm not saying that that's intentional. It's just something cultural. Something as simple as knowing someone's significance of his names, their kids' names, hey, what'd you do on the weekend, et cetera, et cetera. Because I didn't do that early in my career. I just did the work. And I think all those things matter because at the end of the day, we're human beings, and people seek human connections irrespective of your culture, right? So that's what I'll tell young people to start with. And then be true to yourself, right? Be true to who you are. Maybe you have to code switch, but at the end of the day, bring your essence, because it is a beautiful essence, whatever culture you come from. And one thing I will say about Black American culture, and I've had the good fortune of traveling around the globe to 60 countries, and it doesn't matter where you are on this planet, hip-hop culture shows up.
Yeah.
It could be in Beijing, could be in Prague, could be in the middle of Russia. Right? It was funny to see Russian rappers. But 45 million people affecting a planet of 9 billion people. That's an amazing accomplishment culturally. So own that and be proud of it.
I think the one thing I would say is like learning it's the soft skills, and I think one thing that's helped me as I've kind of grown in my career is learning how to say the same message to a different audience in a way that they would understand. So I would be like, especially when it comes to culture, I like, how do you be a culture translator? so that this way then, especially when somebody is far away from culture, that you say something that we're like, oh yeah, totally, I got it. I got what you mean. Versus somebody else is like, okay, how do you explain it so that they're like, oh, I understand. Oh, awesome. That's a no-brainer. That's a business case, right? Like understanding that, those soft skills, because I feel like that helps. And you add more value quickly, and then people all of a sudden you start showing up at tables, and you're listening to you. You have more power, more influence, because it doesn't sound foreign. Again, even me, I'm with Steve, and sometimes I say something, and I'll say something more about performance marketing, and he's like, "What? Can somebody translate that for me?" So even for myself, it's something that I still tell myself, like, okay, no ROAS. Okay, so this is what's happening, right? So like, I just say that. How do we keep that translating?
One piece of advice I was given very early on in my career is find a handful of people that you're on a similar career trajectory with, and build with them, because those will be the people that will challenge you. Those will be the people that will motivate you. And I've been lucky enough to find three guys that we've been on that path our whole career. And to your point earlier, none of the three other guys look like me as well too. Yeah.
I would say for me is, to your point, find my mind-liking people in a company, but it's also showing up authentically, because everyone had something to bring to the table. In my case, specifically being of African descent, I make sure that I always bring part of my culture in a room. The way that I think, the way that I see strategy is different than somebody else. Is filling in those gaps that people necessarily don't see or don't think about.
Right. So authenticity, networking, and connection, I think is probably a great kind of takeaway from that. I guess that was my last question. I definitely want to open it up to the floor, see if there's any questions from the audience that we can address. Feel free to raise your hand or step up to the mic to my right, to your left.
Hi, how are you? Excuse me. My name is Joy Brown. I'm the founder of Culture Creators, and we sit at the intersection of culture and all things business, music. We're industry agnostic. One of the things I've seen shift due to the current administration is, how brands are showing up in spaces of culture. I've been told that they're pretty much like keywords that get triggered when you go and you approach a brand to come in or pitching them a campaign. I want to hear from you all as brand marketers yourselves. Is that true? One, and what are some things as we go into this space as brand marketers ourselves, looking for support on a corporate level? What are some things that we should pay attention to when we're pitching new business or coming to you about a campaign?
I'll take the end. I enjoy my Howard University alumni. So to answer your question, it's true. And I think it depends on the industry, right? For our industry in particular, that's exceptionally regulated. We have government affairs in every state. Much like pharma, it's the alcohol industry. We have to be careful in terms of those trigger words. So the exercise that I think we're going through right now is how do you sanitize campaigns where keywords don't trigger a certain response that speaks more generally to the wider audience, but then you keep words that are sort of nuanced and still culturally relevant. It's hard. We've never been here before, so we go through this exercise even with our legal team, even for putting stuff that's out of home, like basic ads, can we say certain things? It's a horrible place that we're in, and I can't believe that we're in this space. But yes, there's a bit of sanitizing of keywords that are trigger words, if you will.
I'll go. Hey, Joey. I don't know if you remember, I was an intern at Atlantic Records when you were there. So, OG. I think for us, I'm going to take a slightly different angle. I think especially when you're pitching culture, I think in the past it was like, oh, we have this dope culture program, and that was like, great, I'm in. Now it's like, okay, kind of what does that mean? I think it's like double clicking into that, what does that mean, and connecting it to the business. Because then I think as brands, again, this group is super savvy, even those that are not as savvy, that word culture still either they're beyond the sexiness of it and they need more context to get internal buy-in. So I would say like the trigger words, and then from when you're pitching culture, how do you connect it to the business so that it moves more than just like, oh, it's a culture program. Well, what does that do? Because then this way, then it makes you feel, oh, this is a real opportunity, rather than like, oh, it's another culture opportunity. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Easier said than done, but you're right. Connecting it to business growth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, to your point, Citi is also part of a regulated industry, so we see a lot of sanitizing of the campaign and taking out certain words, but it's also a global company, so we cannot afford to not engage and not work with our audience and with those communities. So engagement is taking place. It's just a little more subdued, and yeah, that's how we're doing it during these times.
My name is Frances Kerel Green. I am at VML, and I'm curious to know from your perspectives, how is AI shifting creativity, and what can we do to ensure that we're keeping culture authentic as this is all happening?
So that answer your question? I'll jump in. So my background actually started in tech. And so I embrace AI. I use it every day. I use ChatGPT every day. I use other tools every day. There is an element of creativity that AI will never do. The human mind is an amazing thing. So I use AI to do things that are what I call functional and administrative, accelerates that process, but the creative thinking still comes from me, right? So I think AI is this boogeyman, is a sort of dump all for the fear of the future. I think I saw the same thing when the internet was born, right? I was old enough to be part of the birth of the internet, and it was going to change the world, and the world's going to get on fire, and then we all embrace it. Same with the phones. It's just the next evolution of technological innovation that we have to embrace, and we have to put the safeguards, just like we do with the internet, right? Put the right safeguards in place, but embrace it. It's never going to kill creativity.
I think echoing that, I think Ben Affleck actually said a quote that I thought just articulated very well. AI is like a good, they could hammer home a nail, right? They get really good at that, but they're not actually going to be a craftsman. And that's how I look at it. I think we're looking at it as an accelerate. How does it help us operationally, give us scale? But again, it's not creating the idea.
Yeah.
So like even tactically, like for those of you that are maybe more on the creative side, in the past we've used it like, oh awesome, we have a creative idea, this is a mood board. Awesome, instead of just a mood board, let's actually use AI to actually show what that actually could look like. All of a sudden somebody that on the other side of the house that's not as creative and can't connect the dots with the words in the mood board, oh I see it, got it, okay cool. Right. So it was an accelerator. It wasn't the idea, but it helped bring that idea to life, to help people visualize it and quicker and allow us to move faster rather than spending weeks and weeks of like, no, I actually meant like this. So.
And to bring those ideas to life, you're going to get out of these systems what you put into it, right? So you still, to your point about the human element, the creativity, you're not going to get that out of these systems if you're not putting those prompts in the right way.
Yeah, AI can replace creativity. So the copywriters will be here, maybe not in the same capacity. Where I see AI making a difference, it's in the productivity and how fast we turn around commercial, or maybe what I'm excited about is seeing how we can help us reduce the time between making changes. So when you put out a creative out there and then you test it, and you have to optimize it, how fast you can do it. Right now, in real time for those videos, it's waiting on the research, waiting on the on those research to come back, and those focus group to give you some of the information that you need to then reshoot. So I'm excited to see how AI can help us reduce those gaps and increase productivity in that sense.
Yeah. And I would just add, just for everyone in this room, if you are not digging into AI tools and learning how to use them and figuring out how they will help you be more efficient at your day, you need to be doing that.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that everyone gets that message. You absolutely need to embrace these tools because, these tools are only going to get better and better, and they're going to help you be more efficient at your day-to-day. And if you're not using them, guess what? Your competition is using them.
Yeah.
So please use these tools.
Still requires human input.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
So that actually brings up a good point. We do have a conversation about AI later today, but I'm curious because me being a PR and comm strategist, right now I'm seeing a lot of sort of like AI agents being built in my space as it relates to different roles. And so I'm wondering, in-house folks, like, is that something that you all are starting to see building of AI agents across your organizations?
We're at the very early stages of that, but I'm definitely making sure that my team is embracing AI in all aspects of our marketing, from content marketing to PR and comms to product marketing, so on and so forth. But we're not at the point yet where we have agents built out that I'm managing, which is scary to think about. But
Yeah. It is scary. So we're not there either. We're not even close. But I do have a personal AI agent.
You built it.
For me.
yeah.
It's my secretary, if you will. My digital secretary.
The banking industry doesn't move that fast. We're not there. It's very regulated. It's still a wait-and-see approach.
Yeah, we're not
Yeah.
there either, but we are, again, how do we use it to amplify what we're doing on some of the channels, like retention, like email, how do we get smarter about that, but we're not there yet.
Take one more question. All right, would you?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian. I work here at OUTFRONT. For the brands that you said are getting it right year-round, are they taking a seat or not necessarily leaning into those cultural moments like Black History Month and other events around celebrating Black culture?
I can answer that question. They are definitely leaning into those moments, but they're not only leaning into those moments. They're engaging with the community, the creator, and having them actively involved in the campaign year-round, and I think that's the difference. And they also know when to lean in and when to step back. For example, how you celebrate Black History Month is not the same way that you'll celebrate Juneteenth. Juneteenth is not about selling your shoes or selling your product. Juneteenth about celebrating the community and understanding what that holiday is about. Old Navy learned it the hard way by engaging with the Black influencers and trying to have them wear Black Juneteenth t-shirt and actually selling it to them. And that was a huge backlash. The holiday is about, celebrating freedom and ending slavery. And you're asking those Black influencers not only to buy the t-shirt, but also engaging with them at a very low price when it comes to, how do you say it? The cost of like working with them, how you engage with an influencer that has 1 million followers is not the same way that you engage with an influencer that have 20,000 people following them. So not knowing how to gauge the cost of those influencers was also a problem, and that's where most of the brand fail, is how to engage. It's not necessarily engaging in specific moment, but year-round, and have those emotional cues, emotional intelligence, I would say, and what to do during those moments.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, my answer was no brands get it all right. Right, so I mean, let's be honest. Some brands do better, and some stumble more, but I don't think anyone's perfect. No brand's perfect.
Are any brands afraid because of the tokenism and lack of authenticity, maybe at times, to not participate though?
I think it depends on the product, to be quite honest, right? And to give an example, like the sneaker game, kind of lost its way. Nike did, Reebok did, and Reebok hired Allen Iverson, who's still culturally relevant, still culturally tapped in. And I think that's the point in which you recognize that you have to stay connected to those communities if you want to help them.
And not be afraid to take risk. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Nike engaged with Colin Kaepernick. They did lose, some fans, but overall, the campaign was very successful. So it's not being afraid to engage also.
Great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Bowman, and I have a consulting company called Reframe. We're like the McKinsey of culture. And one of the things that we've seen over the last 10 years, and what we do is help brands prepare for the new majority. It's going to sound crazy, but a lot of brands have data gaps when it comes to women and minorities. And what I mean by data gaps, meaning primary data that exists that helps them plan financially for the future from a growth standpoint. How are you guys addressing those gaps from a primary data perspective, not third party, not your agencies, because ultimately that provides the opportunities to accelerate growth if it is inclusive within your financial annual plan?
It's an excellent question. It's a really, really good question. I don't even know if it's data gaps. I think it's willful ignorance on the parts of brands. I see consumer data, so I'm in the spirits industry. So today, everyone who turns 21,
LDAC.
right, LEA, right, close to 70% are non-white. What does that tell you about the future of the country and how you should be positioning your brands? I don't see us making the shifts that's reflective of the data. So the only thing I can come away with, it's willful ignorance. Data's there. Most brands have that data.
Third party or primary?
Both. Question is, the people in the room don't look like the data. So they have to make that shift. And again, the climate that we're in right now has retarded whatever movement we were going to make. So I think people are comfortable being in this space where, we can ignore the data and pretend it doesn't exist. Here's what I will say. The brands that are being very deliberate and intentional about digging into that data are the ones that are going to succeed, right? At one point, there was a car company called Oldsmobile. Doesn't exist, right? So I think brands have to be very, very smart around what their 10, 20-year plan is going to look like.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
Yeah.
That'll wrap it up for our panel discussion. Really appreciate everyone's expertise, knowledge, time. Gents, lady, thank you for your time. Thank you all for listening in. Really appreciate your time as well.
Thank you.
Now to conclude our session.
Thank you all so much. What a